Welcome to Sausage on a Fork, a podcast dedicated to the UK's longest running children's drama programme, Grange Hill. My name's Neil, and in each episode I'll interview a former cast member about their life before, during and after their time on the programme. Okay, welcome to the latest episode of Sausage on a Fork, and I am absolutely delighted to say that I have been joined for this episode by none other than Dena Davis, who played Miss Martha Jordan. Dena, welcome to Sausage on a Fork.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm over here in Rhode Island in the States right now. So yeah, we have a bit of a time difference.
We certainly do. We certainly do. Well, like you say, thanks so much for coming on. And what we'll do, Dena, is we'll start this episode the way we start every episode. And if you can tell us how you first got into acting.
Oh my gosh. I started acting when I was in school, probably middle school age, maybe sixth grade. And I just fell in love with it and kind of, formed my friendships and my identity through it. I auditioned for the drama schools in America. I ended up going to Cal Arts, and then I ended up transferring to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama in Glasgow, which is how I ended up in the UK.
Yeah.
But honestly, like when I was younger, I was so into classical theater. I loved Shakespeare. I mean, that's all I wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
And it was so funny that, ending up in the UK being an American actress, I wasn't really given that much opportunity to do Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I ended up playing myself, which a lot of actors do. But yeah, I wouldn't change a second of my journey. It was all awesome. And theater is still part of my life today. So
Brilliant. Okay, so when you were in America, did you get sort of much acting work in the States?
I started my career in the UK.
Oh,
honestly.
right. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I trained over here, but once I went over to go to college, I got picked up by an agent there, and then I started working in the UK. So really, my entire acting career was in the UK, and then when I came back to America was when I started my family, and
Right.
I shifted then to teaching kids theater, which is what I still do now, and which I started doing when I was in the UK as well, as a side business. But it's funny because that's kind of where I've realized my passion is, which is funny going back to Martha Jordan, because of course I was the drama teacher.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well we'll look at your career and some of the things that you did, and people that listen to the podcast will know that I say this nearly every episode. My research is probably 99.9% from IMDb, which I know isn't the greatest source. And so I saw that you were in an episode of Jeeves and Wooster, where you played a lady called Muriel, and that episode was set in the USA. But was it filmed in the USA?
No, it was filmed in the UK.
Oh, right.
And that entire season that year was set in America.
Yeah.
So they were supposed to have, gone on a ship and traveled over to America. And I was part of a storyline. I think I was like a money grabbing wannabe wife / children's ornithology expert or something like that.
Yeah, because the husband was a lot older, wasn't he, in that episode? From what I remember, he was a lot older than Muriel.
Yes, because I was after him for his money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a really wonderful experience working on that show. I have to say, Hugh Laurie is one of the most generous actors on the set I have ever worked with. Just to have somebody, to be able to work with him and to have him, in the process say, "Oh, give her the close up on that," was to me, it was like, wow, this is incredible. And we crossed paths later in life when I did Popcorn on the West End, because he actually came and we won an Olivier Award for it, and he came on stage at the end of one of our shows to present Ben Elton with the nomination. So it's really cool. I mean, they were all friends in a friends group, but it's in the UK, it's such a small community and your paths cross all the time.
And were you aware of how big Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie were over here when you did that?
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I was a follower of theirs, and I was a big, fan of the Blackadder series.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you cannot beat that comedy. So
No.
Yeah, it was really cool to work on that show.
Oh, excellent. And then I saw you did something called Unnatural Pursuits, where you played a flight attendant and you got to work with Alan Bates and Richard Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, my memory of that, because I really didn't play a very big part in that. I don't have a huge memory of that show. I know I was in it. I can't really remember what I did in that show.
Okay, brilliant.
But yeah, I mean, I've had the chance to work alongside some really extraordinary actors in my lifetime.
Yeah.
In the UK, not so much in the US.
Because you also did True Crimes with Michael Winner.
I did.
As well. And you were sort of like you were the main suspect in that one, I believe.
Yeah, that was on the story of, I think her name is Elizabeth Haysom, who murdered her family. It was really interesting researching that part and playing. And also going back to Popcorn, where I also played a serial killer. That was a comedy. So yeah, I've kind of made a career out of being a killer. And I'm currently directing Chicago. So I'm
right. Excellent.
Focused on doing murderesses.
Excellent. Okay, so we will move on to Grange Hill then.
Okay.
So how did that come about?
It was just an audition that my agent put me up for. One of the benefits, I think, of being in an American actor, at least at the time in the UK, is that you do fall into a pool. Like once you've done a few things, people tend to pull from the same pool of actors. And yeah, so I just auditioned for the part, and it kind of, I think at the time I hadn't started the children's theater thing yet, so that had nothing to do with it. I don't know. I got the part, and it was it was fun. It was such a great group of people to work with. One of the actors on the show, Louisa Bradshaw White, who played Maria, ended up being one of my best friends. We shared a flat in London for years and went on some crazy adventures together. So, and I'm still in touch with her today, off and on, not as much as I'd like to be, but
yeah.
It definitely was like, it was a family, and it was really interesting to join that show, knowing how long it had been on.
Yeah.
It felt like kind of being oddly a part of history.
Yeah. So you were aware of how big it was at the time?
Oh yeah. I was a fan. I watched it too. I loved, when I first moved to the UK, I turned on the television. The first thing I ever saw on TV was Home and Away.
Right.
I was an EastEnders fan. I watched Grange Hill. I watched it all. So.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So you were in series 17, which went on air in 1994. And you played Miss Martha Jordan, who was an English teacher, a drama teacher. And she'd come in as a friend of, she was billed as a friend of Miss Janowitz, who was another American teacher who'd been on the show. And the first scene that you were in, Martha's being met at the airport by Mr. Robson and Justine Dean, two absolute legendary Grange Hill characters.
Yes.
And neither of them knew that they were there, and they were having an argument about who was there, who should have been there, and why the other one was there. And Martha walked over in the middle of them and sort of they sort of pretended that they weren't arguing then. And then it came about that Martha was going to be staying in a flat that belonged to a friend of Mr. Robson, or Peter, as I'm going to refer to him more as Peter than Mr. Robson. Yeah. Because of your character's relationship with him there. And there was some flowers that had been left in the flat by Peter. And she told Justine that he did get a point for the flowers, but his score at the moment was only 1 out of 10. And that was something that was going to change throughout as the series went on. And the thing that when I've been researching your character, I had to laugh at this bit, because Martha said that she was studying for a PhD, but would only be teaching part-time. But it's strange that she said she was only part-time, because you were actually in every single episode of that series.
I was. I remember that. And because I remember thinking at the time, like, how come I never get a day off? Other people. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, part of the storyline, or bits of Martha's story, I don't think would be able to be broadcast now, because of the way student-teacher relationships are a lot different now, and safeguarding's a much bigger thing now, because Martha invited Justine to her flat for Thanksgiving. Now, at the time, like, Justine was a sixth form and she was meant to be 17, 18 years old.
Right.
But I just don't think, working in a school myself, I just don't think that storyline will be broadcast without some sort of other story or ulterior motive being looked at. If you get what I mean.
Very true. I never even thought of that, but yeah, times have changed a lot. So
Yeah,
you're probably right. That probably would have been weird.
yeah. But she also invited Mr. Robson and another friend who was over from the States. It turned out that it was a cousin Scott. And Mr. Robson thought, or Peter thought, it
Yes.
was going to be, it would just be the two of them. And so that's quite funny then to see the other two sort of being there as well when he turns up, and he is quite taken aback. But I'm guessing that the guy that played Scott, who was Martha's cousin, he was from the States as well in real life, was he?
I believe so. Honestly, I don't really remember him that much because I think that was only one episode.
Yeah.
But I think they did a pretty good job of when they were going to hire American, of actually hiring Americans.
Yeah. And then when he found out that Scott was Martha's cousin, Peter was a lot happier about that.
Oh,
And
Peter.
and then after Scott and Justine left, Peter thought that he should leave, and he gave Martha a kiss on the cheek. And then he came back and said that he didn't really want to leave. He didn't want Martha to think that he was running out quickly on her, but he had to because he had an early meeting. Now we need to talk about Stuart Organ because
Yes.
obviously, Stuart recently sadly passed away.
Right.
But what was it like, from your opinion, to get to, because you worked really closely with him? What was he like to work with him? What was it like getting to work with him as well?
He was a really wonderful man, really warm, very respectful on set. I mean, we were put in situations that, sometimes felt a little uncomfortable. I had to be in a swimming pool and
Yeah.
all of but there was never a moment that he didn't make me feel, very comfortable.
Yeah.
He was a good man. I was
Yeah.
very sad to hear that he had passed.
Yeah. And if I can ask, what would you think, what would your sort of your lasting memory of Stuart be then?
Probably, I think on our last episodes, we traveled to Germany. We were
Yeah.
supposed to be doing some kind of a choir trip or something
Uh-huh.
out there, but it was really fun. I mean, we got to film some really pretty dramatic scenes.
Yeah.
Where I was essentially going to be going back to America, and it wasn't going to work out between the two. And it was genuinely very emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those scenes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I've certainly never forgotten him. It was funny just being sort of the center of a storyline of Grange Hill, which is so focused on the kids, but having it be, and I think that I think from the producer's point of view, that was really all about, giving his character a deeper storyline.
Yeah.
And really just a vehicle for that. But yeah, I mean, he was a good man.
Yeah.
And a big loss.
Yeah, because you've just said there about it was there was this relationship between Peter and Martha, and it went on throughout the series. Now, like sort of things like going for lunch and things like that, and there was this friendship relationship building. But there's one thing I want to talk to you about, because there's a scene quite early on where you were dribbling a football. I'm sorry, I can't call it a soccer ball. I refuse to call it.
It's okay. I know exactly what you're talking about.
But could you actually play?
No.
Because I ask you that because in the scene you don't actually see the ball at your feet. So I was sort of wondering that one. The ball was actually out of shot. You see you sort of running around, but there was no actual ball.
I have to own up to it. No, I have never been a football player. Not one of my skills. And I was probably in high heels anyway. So
right, okay. Because you see sort of some of the boys go, she's quite good, isn't she? When they did it. And then another big storyline of that series was the drama club. And Martha was in charge of that with Jessica Arnold, played by Amy Phillips, who is a big friend of the podcast. I have to say that Amy's been on. She's great. And there's a scene where Brian had been given the part of Romeo, because they were going to do Romeo and Juliet, but he's really, really struggling to get up the courage to kiss Jessica, who was playing Juliet.
Yeah.
and Jessica wondered if Brian was right for Romeo, and it was Martha that said, no, we need to stick to our guns and stick with Brian, which I like that storyline because, and I'm sure Ian, who played Brian, won't mind me saying this, when you've got someone like Martino Lazzari, who played Joe Williams, who was a lad that all the girls fancied and probably would have been a better choice to play Romeo.
Right.
I really like the fact that they said, no, we'll stick with Brian on that one. And Martha also had a chat then with Mr. Brisley, played by another, sadly departed Adam Ray, about the drama group. And it was him that suggested that they do a contemporary version. That Martha really loved that idea. And then at the rehearsal, or one of the rehearsals, I don't know if Anna Wright walked in. I don't know if you remember Anna Wright. Anna was played by Jenny Long. And she was really feisty and just a brilliant character.
Yes.
She was always causing trouble, and Martha suggested that she took the lead in an improvisation. I don't know if you can remember the outcome of this improvisation, where the girls were pretending they were in like a club, and the girls were all talking, and then the boys walked over. I don't know if you can remember the outcome of that, of what happened at the end of this.
Oh my God, I have no idea. You're making me want to rewatch the whole series because I have no idea. I remember the whole Romeo and Juliet thing. I remember the drama club thing. I do not remember that scene at all. What was the outcome?
So it started off fairly well. The girls were just having a chat, and then Joe, played by Martino, comes over and asks one of the girls for just for a dance. And the next thing, it all starts. There's a big argument, and the lads say, "Come on, we're going." And then, Martha said, "That's a good idea. Let's leave it there." He said, "No, I'm not leaving the scene. I'm leaving the group." And the lads all left then. So it was just the girls, and Martha said, "Well, that's the end of the drama group then, it's going to have to fold." But the girls convinced her that they should carry on and they should write their own play. We've talked a bit about Martha and Peter's relationship. And there's a bit where they went for a walk along the canal. And they went for a walk along the canal because Peter said it would be good to get away from all the kids at school. But while they're on the canal, they just saw kids
everywhere. Yes, I remember that.
All over the place. And, there was the likes of two of the lads were fishing. Arnie and Sam were fishing, and Becky and Jacko were walking along. And luckily, they didn't get seen. And Martha gave Peter a kiss. Now, the next scene that Martha and Peter were in, Peter had spent the night at Martha's flat. Now, for this to be getting seen in a kids' TV program,
right,
in the early 90s, when attitudes were very different, I mean, that's just like, we always talk about Grange Hill like being, groundbreaking and everything else.
Yeah,
but that's just really brave, I think, to be showing as well. The fact that there's two unmarried adults,
right,
doing that. Like, I mean, were you ever sort of like thinking, why is this going on a kids' TV program or anything like that?
It probably crossed my mind, but I also knew that show was all about, making big choices like that and representing life how it really is. And so in that way, I mean, I think the show has always been cutting edge in that way.
Yeah.
But again, like, would that happen today? Probably not. But the world has changed a lot since then.
Yeah. Okay. So because he spent the night at the flat and they were going to work, Peter was really like, we've got to make sure that we're seen arriving at school differently, different times. So they came up with this plan where they put Martha's bike in Peter's car, and then they'd get so far near the school and they'd get the bike out and all that. But while he was coming out with all this, he found a postcard in Martha's flat which said, "Oh, my love, Chris." And while they're on the drive to the school, Martha's aware that there's like a cold shoulder from Peter, and she starts talking, and in the end she says, "Look, stop the car here, I'll get out and I'll ride from here." And it looked like the relationship was over before it had really started. So while they're getting up the car and they're trying to get the bike out, some of the kids actually see them and come over and say, "You're okay." And they pretended that Martha's bike had a puncture, and they were actually putting the bike back into the car. So, she gets back in the car and they drive to the school, and Peter did try to apologize, but Martha was like, you don't need to say anything. And then he went round to her flat,
right,
with some flowers to apologize. And I'm going to ask you again. He went round with flowers to apologize, but can you remember what Martha made him do? So
I have no idea. Maybe get down on his knees and
there you go. That's
apologies?
it. That's
Is
it.
that right?
Yeah. She made him get on his knees and grovel for forgiveness.
Okay.
And it turned out that Chris was Martha's sister-in-law, called Christina.
Right.
And like I say, it was uncharted territory for this dynamic to be getting shown so much. There'd been stories with relationships with teachers before, but we only ever saw them in the school, or you might see them at the shop, but you would never
right.
see them, round at flats, or out on dates, or anything like that. And again, I just think it was really, really brave for a
Quite
kid.
risque.
Yeah, definitely. Like, they got saw at the theatre by Jessica and her friends at the old school, from her old school, and they were trying to keep that relationship secret, but the news soon spread, and Martha said, "Look, we need to be careful here." And then round about that time was when, still with the drama group, the lads went back, and this was a real big storyline. I think it was the first time Grange Hill had ever tackled this kind of storyline, because the lads went back to the drama group, and there was a rehearsal, and Martha wasn't there because she thought there was a staff meeting and she was going to be late. There was a thing with Mrs. Keel, who was the head, was having all sorts of problems herself, and was organising things or not organising things.
Yeah.
So while this thing at the drama group, while the lads were there, the lads were messing about and annoying the girls, and Jessica took Joe's cap, and Joe was like, "You got to help me get it back, lads." And while that was happening, the lads all crowded round her, and Jessica was assaulted by one of them. And again, for a children's television program, to be showing that, I've spoke to Ian, who played Brian, and Ian said that he thinks when they filmed that, nobody knew who the attacker was, which obviously made it better for people watching, because if people don't know who it is, and the actors themselves don't know who it is, it makes it a much more dramatic storyline. But because obviously you were then involved, Martha was involved with the investigations and stuff like that, and there was a reconstruction. They tried to do a reconstruction with Peter wanted, all the lads there, and so Martha was in there as Jessica. But when you're filming something like that, does the atmosphere change because of the subject matter?
Sure, of course it does. I mean, I think anytime you're taking on subject matter like that, it hits, it strikes to the bone for all of us.
Yeah.
And to feel like you're talking about something that kids out there are going to relate to.
Yeah.
So it is taken seriously by the group and felt very deeply.
Yeah. Obviously, when it's kids as well, kids are kids, aren't they? And they spend a lot of their time messing about. But it's good to know that they realize as well what they're doing. The story they're telling. It's good to know that they're gonna change their attitudes towards it as well. So I just think that's really good.
I mean, I think all of the cast, all the kids who were involved were very intelligent human beings who, they weren't just showing up in lines. They knew they were part of something that was important.
Brilliant. And the thing about that, the lads were then all saying that, Jessica had made it all up, which, again, is when things like that happen, that's what certain people say, and if they don't know for definite, and that's what everyone forms their own judgment, don't they? Rightly or wrongly, everyone forms their own judgments of what happened. And the lads that were there were saying they thought Jessica had made it up, and Martha actually says to Peter that Peter was sort of acting in that way as well.
Right.
Because nobody could verify Jessica's story. And Martha then told Peter that she thought that reenactment that he'd done, the reconstruction, was a complete waste of time. If that's what he was going to still be thinking, what was What was the
Right.
point in doing it? And Martha spoke to Amy, who just wanted to forget it. But Martha told Amy that she needed to get noisy. And that's the phrase she used. You need to get noisy about what had happened and to speak to the other girls in the drama group. They could get noisy together. So they decided to write a play about relationships and how difficult the male sex can be was the line. And then Martha said, if it was about the problems men cause, it would be a very long show. It was Martha's take on it. But yeah, I mean, like I say, it's one of those things, that storyline, because it hadn't been addressed before in a kids' TV program, to be taken on. And like we always say about how groundbreaking it was, like I've already said.
Right.
I just think it really brave as well to take that on and showing the fact that Jessica wanted to forget about it. Sorry.
Yeah. And don't forget, this was decades before the whole Me Too movement.
Yeah, definitely. And then Peter asked Martha for help with the school brochure. And she said she couldn't because of the work she had to do for her PhD. The PhD came back. It hadn't been mentioned for a while, but she was already behind on it and saying that she didn't regret their time together. But she was actually in the UK for a reason. You know, maybe it's that trouble in paradise brewing again here.
Right.
And then I love this scene. There's a scene with Martha and Mrs. Munro, played by Anna Quayle.
Yeah.
Anna Quayle, brilliant, whatever she was
Love
in,
her.
you know. And I always think the fact that a program, you knew how good Grange Hill was by the fact that she was in it. You
I
know,
know.
she was there. And there's a scene where, as I say, they're talking to each other, and they end up talking about Peter, and Mrs. Munro saying he looks tired, and she wondered if he was sleeping well. And Martha's like, well, what are you asking me for? Type thing. You know, she's showing that she knew about them, but not actually
Right.
saying about it. And then Martha said that he was quite an impossible man. And Mrs. Munro said, well, all men are impossible, but some are worth the effort. Now, like I say, I've just mentioned Anna quietly, but obviously getting to work with her must have been incredible.
She is one of the best.
I mean, you know, you see her in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Hard Day's Night, which is one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
And she's only in it for like 2 minutes, but she actually absolutely steals that scene.
She steals this scene. Yeah. I directed a production of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang a few years ago, and I was able to tell the kids that go watch the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
she's a legend.
Brilliant. And then when all this was going on with Martha and Peter, Martha went round to Peter's house. And when she got there, again, blaring that student-teacher boundaries, Justine was there.
Right.
Because she was there to discuss the school brochure, because she was the one that was
Right.
going to do it. And Martha and Peter eventually make up again and saying that they had to make time for each other. And again, this is that thing where this was a program about a kid's school, but this was a huge storyline, you know,
Yeah.
this relationship. This is far more like EastEnders or Coronation Street, this part of it. Like
Right.
the bit where Justine's in the flat and they were saying about they need to make time for each other was because Peter was acting head at the time. And there was like one of the early days of school Ofsted inspections was happening. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so obviously he was stressing quite a lot. They arranged a date in a wine bar. So Martha went and she waited for over an hour on her own. But in the meantime, Justine had turned up with one of her old school friends. And then Peter arrived and he spoke to Justine and her friend before he said anything to Martha. So Martha's understandably annoyed with him again. And this is where you said earlier on, this is where they then go to the swimming pool. They basically broke into the school, into the school swimming pool, and Martha saying he could lose his job. And he said he didn't care. Martha said that he needed to be like that more often. And then Martha dropped an absolute bombshell on the relationship. by saying that they needed to stop seeing each other for a while because she was confused. And if she didn't see him, it would help her know how she felt about him. And the next day, Martha had heard about how Justine had helped the man who'd been stabbed the night before. But she also heard that Peter had been there and gone to the hospital with Justine. And there was, when there's these things, there was little like sort of, niggling doubts then.
Yeah.
And it was all innocent. But Martha's obviously thinking the worst at this point. And she actually says to Peter, "Are you okay?" Because she did what happened. And what had happened was, he'd said, because of what Martha had said to Peter, he couldn't sleep and he'd gone out for a run and he'd met Justine when she was calling the police. And then Martha then asked Peter if he ever spoke to Justine about their relationship. And he was like, well, no, of course not. But again, it's just showing like, the little insecurities.
Yeah.
And things. Now, we talked about it, the girls wanted to write a play, and they did write their own play called Bits and Pieces. And Martha and Mrs. Munro loved it. But Mrs. Munro said there's no way they could put it on at the school because of the subject matter, because it would have all been about a sex scandal at Grange Hill.
Right.
Now, one of the girls in those scenes was Francesca Martinez, who played Rachel. I mean, could you tell at that point that she would have the career in stand-up comedy that she's had, because she is a really, really accomplished stand-up comedian? Like,
I don't know if I would have ever thought of her going into comedy, but I knew she was going to be a success at whatever she did because she was just incredible.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Now, obviously, Martha said to Peter, we need to stop seeing each other for a while. And then Peter then asked Martha if she'd go camping with him in the summer. But she said she wouldn't go in the UK because of the UK's weather. Fair enough. Fair comments. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So can you remember where he suggested going instead?
I cannot.
Okay. So he suggested that they went to Morocco instead. So then Martha then said, well, there's going to be scorpions here. So Peter said, well, what about a hotel then? And Martha said that was a better idea. Now,
I relate to this character.
Yeah. In the meantime, this is what you were talking about earlier on with the choir. Mr. Manjeki, the director of the choir, the music teacher, told Peter that they needed him for the trip to Germany. And then Mr. Manjeki also then told Martha that Peter was going with them. Peter spoke to Martha about Morocco, and Martha was annoyed again with Peter about him going to Germany. I don't know why he kept going back to it, if I'm completely honest.
But it's like Peter, red flag central between the two of them.
Yeah. Peter then said Morocco was going to have to be delayed because of Germany, and there would also be new meetings about the new head as well. And Martha said she'd been thinking about going straight back to the States instead of Morocco. And then Peter then tried to say something to Martha. And as he's about to say it, he heard some children singing who should have been in lessons. So he told them off. And when he went back, Martha had gone, as you say, poor Peter. And Martha told Peter he should go with the choir to Germany. But this is where Justine and Maria, who, you mentioned Maria earlier, a little bit of subterfuge here. They went round to Martha's flat to ask her to sing a song that Maria was having trouble with for the choir. So Martha sang it and Justine recorded it. And Justine swapped the tapes over. It was going to go in Mr. Manjeki's in his car radio. And when he played it, everyone could hear, including Martha, who went on the hunt for Justine and Maria. And Mr. Manjeki told Martha he wants her for the choir. And Mr. Robson asked her to go to Germany. And she said she'd think about it. But I need to ask you, was that you singing?
Yes, it was me singing. And I have to say that I didn't really identify as a singer back then. And they told me they wanted me to sing. But yeah, that was a little humiliating.
Right,
you and me.
But did they do what other people have said? Did you go to like recording studio and stuff like that? Or was it just...
No, not at all. I remember us, it was very kind of low key sing into a microphone. It was not a big,
Right. Okay. All right.
it was just embarrassing. That's all I can say.
But you know what? It sounds really good when you listen to it. I have to say, like, because I wasn't sure. I'm going to say I wasn't sure if they got someone else in to do that. But no, that's great. If that was your voice, that's brilliant.
That was me. And then the
And
funny thing is, I know that they were saying, we want a real American kind of classic song. And I had never heard, I believe it was Simple Gifts or something.
yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. Which later on in life, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's that song they made me sing when I was young as well. And I'd spent the majority of my time, in the UK. So
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. And obviously, Maria at that time was having a bit of an identity crisis. And Martha had heard that Maria didn't want to go to Germany. And Martha told her that she should go as the choir needed her. So she did agree to go. And when they get to Germany, it all starts off a little bit sort of Rocky Horror Picture Show. If you remember,
Yep.
it was all sorts of like talking about vampires and creaking doors and
Yeah.
darkness and things like that. And I love that. I love the fact that they put that in, like that little bit of comedy in there as well. Now, Martha went to Germany, but with complete ulterior motives for herself because she, her family was from Poland and where they were staying wasn't too far away.
Right.
Now, I mean, that must have been some experience as well, not just going to Germany with the program, but going to those places as well. That must
It was really cool. And it was, not something that I think anybody really expected in that series. I remember it being absolutely freezing,
yeah.
but yeah, super fun and very bonding experience for the cast as well
Yeah.
to be somewhere else.
Yeah. Now, so Martha went off into Poland to find the castle where her mum and dad had met because, as you say, Martha's mum was Polish and her dad was a GI, and they sort of met. It was like quite sneakily the way they had to do it. And Peter didn't know why she hadn't told him where she was going and was considered missing, but also Josh had sneaked over the border, telling the border guards he was going with Martha. So Peter went with the German girl, Rosa, in a little car into Poland to try and find Martha. And they went to the castle and they found her. And this is where Peter asked Martha not to go back to the USA and to stay in England with him. And she said she'd think about it. And when they were driving back into Germany, like we say, they find Josh. They picked up in Poland, but also Josh had brought a hand grenade, if you remember that.
Yeah.
Peter then threw it into a lake. Now, I need to say this. Whenever I'm putting an episode of the podcast online, on social media, I'll always do like a guest competition, and I put picture clues on, and people then have to guess who they think the next guest is going to be. And the first person to guess gets to ask a question to the following guest.
Okay.
So this is from someone called Bryn Paul, and it's about those scenes. And you just sort of mentioned it anyway. So when you're filming those scenes in East Germany and Poland, that weather looked absolutely freezing in those scenes. And, like in Gorlitt's Town. But like, what was, and you mentioned it a little bit, but was it just as cold as it looked?
It was absolutely freezing. And I'm someone who's cold all the time anyway. And I found myself freezing in the UK all the time. It was beyond cold. Yes. And it's interesting when you're filming something like that because, they'll warm you up as much as possible, but you can't film a scene when you have coats and hats, absolutely covering. So there is moments where you have to take some of that stuff off and, it was brutally cold.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So then we see this like sort of race against time to get back to perform for the choir. And they did get back and they performed in the show. But can you remember what song the choir sang?
I remember working on harmonies for it, and I can't remember. Tell me.
So it was He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. But it was like a medley. He's Got the Whole World in His Hands and Go Tell It on the Mountain as well. It was the other one.
Yeah. Yep.
And then we get that scene that you talked about very early on where Martha then told Peter that she wasn't ready to leave the States permanently. And that signaled the end for Martha and Peter, but also it signaled the end of Martha's time on Grange Hill. Now, was it only ever going to be 1 year that you were there?
I mean, my contract was for a year. So,
Right.
I mean, I think it probably would have depended on where they decided they wanted to take the storyline. You never know what producers and writers are gonna decide on, but I think the relationship between Martha and Mr. Robson was so on again, off again. It's like, how long could they drag it out?
Yeah.
Either they're gonna, I think they probably went for the more dramatic exit
Right.
rather than,
Yeah.
all is. I don't think they ever had the relationship where all is all going to be well.
No, I mean, it was more turbulent than like Ross and Rachel on Friends, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah,
they,
yeah.
they were always Martha and Peter always seemed to be on a break.
It just sadly was not meant to be.
I mean,
There was a
would
lot
you
of
like
fun
to have
times in it.
would you like to have stayed on Granger?
I don't know. It was. I wasn't really able to do anything else when I was working on that show because it
Right.
was such a full-time commitment.
Uh-huh.
And I've always been a lot more drawn to the theater than I was television and film. So I would have liked to maybe come back as a guest
Uh-huh.
here or there because I loved everybody that I worked with.
Yeah.
But I think I was happy to move on afterwards and move on to other things.
Okay.
And
And
like I say, I maintain friendships on that show. And it's funny that you mentioned Amy, who played Jessica, because
yeah.
the weirdest thing happened a few years ago. I'm back in touch with her,
Uh-huh.
but one of my very good friends here in Rhode Island, um, the last name is Keith.
Right.
And my friend's husband said to me, do you happen to know an actress named Amy? She's married to my cousin, and she was on that show Grange Hill that you did. And I went, wait, what?
No way.
Yeah, so I reached out to her on Facebook and said, you're not going to believe this. So she's actually a relative now of one of my very close friends here in the States.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
that is unbelievable. It's a small world, isn't it?
it is a very small
It
world.
really is. Okay, so then after Grange Hill, I don't know how many people are going to know this, but you worked on another iconic British program. Now you're laughing now, but and
I know
probably
what you're going to say.
people listening to this will probably laugh when they find out as well. But it is another iconic. This program was huge. I mean, at the time, you couldn't escape this. This was everywhere.
I know.
The merchandise alone, people trying to get hold of the merchandise for this program, that the Christmas that this was out was unbelievable. Can you tell us what program you worked on?
All right. And I kept this secret for many years because I wanted to be seen as a serious actress. But yes, I did work on Teletubbies.
Brilliant.
I did not walk around. I was not at Pinewood Studios walking around in one of those suits. I worked on voiceover. So,
Right.
but yeah.
Because as I say, I've mentioned IMDb and I looked on that and I didn't believe that. So obviously, as you know, I emailed you the other week to find out if you definitely were on that program. So the voiceovers are different in the States than they are in the UK.
So what they were doing at the time is they wanted to do an American voiceover of the whole entire series for the release of it in the United States. And to be honest with you, I don't even know if they ever ended up using it or if they kept the British. I'm not really sure because I wasn't watching it. But it's pretty funny when you have a lifetime of work and stuff that you're really proud of, and the only thing that really people are impressed with is Teletubbies.
So that's you singing like the Grand Old Duke of York and things like that.
No, so I did a lot of the sort of iconic voiceover, like the over the hill and far away, Teletubbies come to play. So I did a lot of that stuff.
Brilliant. Okay. So then your CV on IMDb sort of stops there. So did you carry on in the industry?
Well, so what happened is I ended up auditioning for the regional tour of Ben Elton's Popcorn.
Right.
We did the first reading of that at the National Theater, and I was lucky enough to be cast in the show that went on tour. We went to Nottingham and Leeds, and then the show got picked up to go to the West End, and I was lucky enough I stayed through that entire process. So I was part of the initial reading all the way up to when it went into the West End, and I stayed in the show for over 2 years. Yeah. And it was through that show that I got picked up by an agent who wanted to bring me back to America.
Right.
And I had been in the UK for so long, and I kind of felt like I was getting, like I said, I was playing a lot of American parts, and I just kind of, I thought, is this an opportunity for me to take my career in a different direction? And ultimately, I'm not sure it was the right choice, because I really was so in love with the theater, and for my agent to bring me to LA, which was great because I had all my friends from college were there. It was a very easy segue for me to head to LA. But at the time, I was also turning 30, and being in LA, being an actress in her 30s, entering that industry. And I mean, I went on so many auditions, and I have to say the majority of those auditions went really well because I had something to talk about. I was able to, go on and talk about it, an entire career that I'd had in the UK, but I wasn't getting booked for those. They were booking. I remember going up against Jessica Alba for one of some big series she did. It's like, they're not going to cast someone who was 30 and ultimately unknown in the States. But I entered a different part of my life. I actually started working at Fox Broadcasting. And I'm sure I got that job because of the background that I had, and I loved it. It was like, wow, this is like regular work, and you show up with grown-ups. And then I ended up I got married to a British man who came over with me and had my boys, and that became the next stage of my life, was raising my children. And then I ended up setting up, Louisa Bradshaw White and I had set up, after Grange Hill, we set up a weekend theater school in Wimbledon. And I think because both of us had been on Grange Hill, we attracted a lot of kids to that. But through doing those classes, I realized, oh my gosh, this is what everything I've been doing has been leading up to, because I found more fulfillment in working with those kids than I had ever found myself on stage or behind the camera or whatever. So when I came back to the States, once my kids became school age, we actually for a while went back to the UK, and we moved to Coventry, which is where my ex-husband's family lived. And my boys went to the Coventry Preparatory School, which is no longer there. I think they've merged, but I started the theater program there. And then came back to the US, and I've started a program now called Arts Alive, which has been going for 14 years now, and I have to say, the Arts Alive came about because of my experience in the UK, because I felt that theater was so ingrained in the culture there. And when I returned to the US and saw that it had been almost completely eliminated from the schools and from the experience, due to budget cuts and people just not really understanding the value of the arts anymore. So my new mission became about bringing theater back into the schools. So we formed a nonprofit, and we work within the school PTOs. And we're across about six different schools right now, across Rhode Island. It's a small state, but I feel like we're making a big impact. And we're very focused on musical theater, but we start kids from first grade, which in the UK would be year one, year two. I don't know. I can't remember, because I know they start reception younger in the UK. But we start them really young, and then we take them all the way through to high school. And I've had kids now that have gone off to college, and they've graduated, and they come back, they work with me. We have an internship program. So it's just, I feel like I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. So yes, Martha is me.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, so that has got to be, that must be incredibly rewarding as well.
There's nothing like it. There's nothing like seeing, a kid who is discovering who they are and what they can be in the world. And I've never tell the kids that we're working, we're never working with them to become actors. Some of them do anyway, but it's really about building confidence. And in a world that we're living in that is so technology driven and now AI driven, and who are the most important people in the workplace? It's creatives. People that are able to communicate and create and problem solve and all the things that theater really brings out of you. And we've seen some incredible success stories.
Brilliant. Because I saw you recently, you just finished a show this week, have you? Or is that right?
We have shows going all year. We finished a show. We did a little production of Willy Wonka Kids over in Warwick and one side, which I wasn't a director on that one, but I finished my production of Mean Girls a few weeks ago, which was a big success. And I'm currently working on my high school production of Chicago, which it's just going to be phenomenal. The kids, we auditioned kids from all over the state to be in this. So the ones
Excellent.
who are there really want to be there, and it's a
Brilliant.
spicy, wonderful show.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, you've mentioned a couple of people here, but I still, you mentioned the fact of like Louisa and Amy, but are you in touch with anyone else who was on Grange Hill with you?
I can't say that I am. I mean, Rachel Roberts for a while, I was in touch with her. I've lost touch with her.
Uh-huh.
Not really. I mean, the beauty of Facebook and social media is that it's very easy
Yeah.
to find people and stay in touch,
Yeah.
you know.
Brilliant. Okay. Okay, Tina. Well, we are sort of coming towards the end of the interview, but I've got a few more questions to ask, and they're all the same questions I ask at the end of every episode, and they're all
Okay.
Grange Hill related,
Okay.
as you could probably imagine. Okay. So recently, sort of in the last couple of years, there's been talk of a Grange Hill movie in development.
Really?
Yeah, Phil Redmond has written it. Kellen Jones, who played the teacher later on, is involved. Sarah Sugarman, who was a pupil in the very early days and is now a really good director, she's involved as well. But what do you think of the idea of a Grange Hill movie?
I think it's a great idea. I think it would be just because it was such a different era, it would be interesting to see. I mean, would it be set, you know, where when they set it? Would they set it?
Yeah, this one the question. I believe it's going to be a modern setting.
Right.
From what I've heard, it's going to be set now, and all the challenges that young people have these days. Yeah. Okay.
It'll
And
be interesting to see what sort of topics they attack because Grange Hill was known for being groundbreaking. So it's like would have to be, they'd have to stay in line with what they've always done.
Yeah, definitely. And if you were asked, would we see a return of Martha Jordan?
Sure.
Excellent.
I don't know if they'd want me after what I put poor Mr. Robson through, but
brilliant.
Yeah,
okay, and you said earlier on that you watched Grange Hill and you're aware of how it went, what happened in it. But I have to ask you this: other than Martha Jordan, who was your favourite character in Grange Hill?
Well, I certainly would never say Martha Jordan was my favorite character. I don't know. I love Anna Quayle. I love her.
Yeah.
I think Rachel Victoria Roberts, I think her character was very strong.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember the early days of Grange Hill. I can't remember the names of the characters, but I loved those characters.
Yeah.
The real early.
Like Tucker Jenkins and
Yes.
Zamo and people like that. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so if you couldn't have played Martha, which other character do you think you would have liked to have played?
I honestly, I don't know. I think I would have loved to have been one of the kids on the show.
Yeah.
But I was too old.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, though. You say that because I don't think some of those sixth formers, the likes of Justine and Richard, and you didn't look too much older than them, and I think that's why, because you very rarely was Martha called Miss by the kids. They called her Martha, and I think that was because the age difference didn't look.
I mean, I think I felt a lot older than I was, but when I looked, I was actually only in my mid-20s, so I wasn't that much older than. And like I said, like Louisa and I ended up being flatmates.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so the final question then, Dena, is why do you think there's still such affection for Grange Hill?
I don't know. I think maybe just, it was around for a long time, and the fact that it was groundbreaking, and a lot of programs, a lot of stuff is out there trying to mimic and trying to be part of something that's already been created. And I think maybe the originality of it is what made it stick around. And also being something, I mean, the comparison to EastEnders, but being for young people and for young people's issues, it was a pretty special show. And I'm certainly proud to have my little speck of time that I was on it. I was really proud to be a part of that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Dena, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great talking to you and hearing your experience.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm shocked to know that anybody even remembers me. So
yeah, no, definitely. I honestly, I'm always getting people asking, can you get Martha Jordan on? Always. So, it's been great hearing not just your experiences of Grange Hill, but also the industry as a whole as well. And I don't think I've stopped smiling the whole time we've been on. So thank you so much, because I know it's early in the morning over there, so much so that we got our times mixed up, didn't we? On the time difference.
Sorry about
that. But no, thank you so much for coming on. It really, really has been great.
Thank you, and great job doing this and keeping people connected. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. And to anyone that's listening, I'll speak to you next time. Cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.